and welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. Today we'll be continuing a discussion we started last year on Internet Governance IG and ICT in Small Island Developing States, SIDS. As we noted last year, virtually all Caribbean countries have been classified as SIDS, and it is important that we understand the importance of that classification with respect to ICT. Once again, we're delighted to have Tracy Hackshaw to continue the conversation. Tracy is an ICT and digital economy strategist who is also the past chairman of the Internet Society of Trinidad and Tobago, and he wears a variety of hats in the global IG space. So in this episode, we want to get an update on possible changes that have occurred in the IG and wider ICT space within the context of small island developing states, along with new and emerging issues of which we should be aware. Tracy, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me again. How are you?
I'm great. And just to get the ball rolling, how has the SIDS and ICT landscape changed since we spoke last year?
Well, I don't think there's been any significant change, either positively or negatively. It's sort of stayed pretty much where it is. One thing I have seen, though, is what I would call a new development in terms of low Earth orbit satellite organizations like OneWeb and Starlink from Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos's project Kuiper, I think it's called, and Telesat, sort of, I guess, looking at SIDS as potential targets for access and connectivity. And while that discussion was sort of theoretical a year ago or maybe 2 years ago, we've actually seen in the last year launches of satellites by OneWeb and Starlink. OneWeb actually was in Trinidad and Tobago earlier this year, sponsoring a CTU, Caribbean Telecommunications Union event called Futurescape. And they were discussing with participants their desire to have the Caribbean as part of their, target market. So one of the things we could probably start seeing in certainly in the Caribbean and perhaps in the Pacific region are these low Earth orbit satellite organizations offering services at perhaps more affordable rates than are currently available with other satellite organizations with lower latency. And in this way, we could probably see, in my view, connectivity at a level that has not been previously available to small and developing states, I guess, through the satellite organizations. I think that's one key shift, and a real shift that I've seen in terms of the ICT landscape in the last 12 months or so.
Right. That's interesting. And certainly, yes, the whole thrust to low orbiting satellites. They have been around for quite a while, but now that, as you rightfully are saying, probably looking at targeting SIDS as the markets.
Yeah, and of course, they've actually launched them now, because, maybe a year ago, they were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But we've actually had 2 actual launches. OneWeb and Starlink have launched them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in orbit now, and perhaps we'll start to see the benefit of that in the next, maybe 12 months. And if these thousands of satellites start to circle the Earth, as what's projected to happen, we are very likely to start seeing packages being offered to this part of the world for access. And so beyond things like Loon and those types of projects was always very theoretical, and even in the case of Loon, where we had I think it's Puerto Rico who had benefited from Loon temporarily when the last hurricane. We're actually seeing an opportunity now, I think, for these companies to offer these services to remote regions, and presumably at low rates or affordable rates, I would say, and at maybe not perfect connectivity in terms of latency, but certainly something that you probably would not normally miss or see a difference if you're using either mobile or standard Wi-Fi connectivity. Certainly not the same level of fiber, but obviously, if you're not connected, this is an advantage.
And absolutely, and certainly for internet access, where the latency tolerances are greater than if it was probably voice communication. So
Correct. Yes.
that is definitely something to look forward to. And what might be key policy issues that you think currently are at the fore, at least of which we should be aware? I guess from a SIDS perspective.
Yeah, so I think that within the larger grouping of the SIDS, the regions, we still have the issue of access and affordability. So there's always a perception that that has disappeared, and I think if you look at it from an OECD level thought process, there's always this suspicion or feeling that only remote areas in islands are without access, but really and truly, we're talking about underserved areas. So it's not just remote; it's also groups who may not have access for various reasons. Whether it be economic reasons or disadvantages that are not traditionally served by companies who are offering services. So if you are, disabled, or if you are older, and in some cases, women and girls, those kinds of things that are still at play. So access and affordability, I think that still remains a challenge within small and developing states. And of course, obviously, still have the remoteness issue in terms of connectivity and fiber coming in to your physical locations, connectivity between islands, obviously a major issue. But beyond the access and affordability issues, which we still grapple with, we also start to see significantly more what I would call cybersecurity challenges, including privacy issues. And those are not necessarily only internet-related issues. So, just scanning the news coming out of the Caribbean, for example, you're still seeing issues related to things like skimming, card skimming at ATM machines, which is still highly prevalent. In addition to that, obviously, you're seeing a lot of phishing attacks that are being reported, and some, as we know, are not reported. We're hearing about ransomware attacks at large institutions, including financial institutions who don't necessarily have to report, who are not reporting them today. And when you couple that with the whole recently implemented GDPR regime, we would be, I think, in this part of the world, challenged at a policy level to deal with that, because as many may have said already, and many may tell you from the legal perspective, most of our legislative frameworks are, if we do have data protection or privacy legislation already in place, it tends to be very dated. And that's dated, 2010. It may seem like just 10 years ago, but in 10 years, a lot has changed. And for example, with GDPR coming in, you would see a significant shift in the thought process of countries who are doing business with you as a small island developing state. And is your legislation up to scratch in dealing with things like that? We also have issues that are continuously challenging small countries and small states: indigenous digital payment solutions, the lack of proper e-commerce facilities within these countries. You're still depending on international facilities to do this, and to a large extent, the local banking sector is not in a position to have your transactions made in local currency if you're trying to do something locally. And if you're selling overseas, the cost of doing business in US or foreign currency is quite prohibitive. So you're also challenged by selling out of the country. And I think another major challenge that we face in the SIDS region, or SIDS countries, would be still those issues of e-waste and recyclable materials that we haven't really gotten over as yet, as well as the lack of maybe renewable energy sources to power ICT investments. So if we have anybody trying to do something in the Caribbean or in the Pacific with the ICT, you tend to require a lot of energy to make that happen, and we still don't have proper reservoirs of renewable energy to allow these things to happen, or enough capacity on the grid to allow it to happen without being detrimental to the environment in some way.
Definitely. Yeah, as you're talking, I'm there, making notes, but also shaking my head because once you mentioned e-waste and renewable energy and certainly GDPR, I just wanted to also find out one of the points you made last year was your concern that the Caribbean region, had not fully embraced the SIDS agenda. Has there just been any improvement on that?
I think yes and no. So very recently, you would have seen the Barbados Prime Minister basically speak at the UN, and I think that news article came out talking about her demanding more time to make the case for small and developing states. And in her case, I think it's a special case for Prime Minister Motley, who we all know, has been quite strong on these issues previously, and is a strong personality generally. But beyond that, we haven't really seen, I guess, Caribbean leaders stepping up to focus on themselves as small and developing states over and beyond, I guess, disaster prevention or disaster resilience type issues. So, with regards to a hurricane or storm passing through the region, then you see the SIDS agenda move to the front or the
Yes.
forefront. But once that disappears, it's almost like back to usual business. And in the case of many of these islands, just surviving. I haven't really been able to see or to detect whether or not in the Pacific or the Caribbean, whether you'd see leadership being taken at the level of government or even the private sector that would allow the SIDS agenda to really come forward. So I would say we've lost some ground since 2014. And in going forward, we hope that the agenda would be placed much higher on the UN in the UN system, in other fora, and certainly even within our own countries. Because as I have said before, we have an opportunity to partner with each other to really make this thrust, as 50 odd countries, and as Prime Minister Motley said, 20% of the world's population. We do have an opportunity to make this a real case going forward, but we still haven't, I think, really gotten there as yet, unfortunately.
Right. And I mean, as you rightfully said, I think it's only when the vulnerabilities come to the fore that we remember that we are SIDS and that
That's right, yeah.
we need to be more aware and therefore proactive in some of the things that we do and how we position ourselves in the world. But I also think just looking back at this vulnerability, especially I'm thinking to natural disasters in light of Hurricane Dorian recently. Probably can you just give us a sense as to what role you think ICT can and should be playing in SIDS countries, especially in light of the vulnerabilities that we have?
Well, certainly, from where I sit, I really dislike the concept of ICT being used to assist after disasters. Let me clarify what I mean by that. We should be using it to proactively deal with the issue. So, warning systems, being able to move people to higher ground in cases where there are issues with rising sea levels or flooding coming. We could probably be using sensors and other solutions that are already available to ensure that not only are we prepared, but that when the inevitable does in fact happen, we are able to minimize the loss of human life at the very least. We may not be able to minimize property loss because you can't move a house, so you can't physically move things that are in place, but certainly can minimize loss of life. And I really was disheartened to hear about the situation in the Bahamas where many lives were lost after Dorian. So having said that, obviously, and being proactive, we also need to use ICT with the assumption that we are not as proactive as we might normally be to ensure that communication is essentially well set up after disaster strikes. And something like an earthquake, obviously, you would have a situation where you can't predict, or you may not be able to deal with that as as proactively as you'd want to, obviously. But certainly in a hurricane or a storm or other a volcanic eruption, perhaps that you'll be able to use the tools and technology to afford communication afterwards, to also allow for, I think in the case of Haiti, we have a very good example of mobile money being implemented while the banks and other institutions were down, and there were ways to transfer value across from agency, so relief agency to individual using mobile money. And we also, I think, would want to utilize the not just the technology, but the approach of crowdfunding to allow, which is what we're seeing today, in effect. So after disaster, the existing ICT environments or platforms that are available allow funds to move much faster into the territories than you would find goods and supplies, which that might have to come by boat or certainly on plane and get distributed. But certainly crowdfunding, at least agencies who are willing to receive the funds and find a way to get relief to those territories and people quickly.
Yes.
So I think that's the main role that they can play right now. And I know that the CTU and Canto and other agencies are looking at other approaches that ICT can take in terms of being proactive and being necessarily reactive in these cases.
Okay. All right. So I guess let's take a step back from looking at SIDS and ICT and begin to tap into your expertise as a digital economy strategist. What is your take on the state of the digital economy in the Caribbean?
All right. So this is that's a very good question, Michelle. So do we have a digital economy in the Caribbean, right? So that's kind of almost where you're taking this question. So globally, with the digital economy, for those who may not be aware, essentially, long story short, using the World Economic Forum figures, 60% of the global GDP will be digital form by 2025, 2030, which is very shortly. And that's a staggering figure, 60%. Where are we in the Caribbean in relation to that? So a lot of businesses and governments, I think, might be hearing about it or aware of it, certainly reading about it, and talk about doing something to achieve participation in the digital economy. But are we really doing anything? Because we continue to be challenged by our small size as SIDS, and our therefore inability to truly compete at scale. To compete at scale, we would need to find measures within our economies to build institutional support for what I would call an entrepreneurial or startup culture. What I've seen happening, certainly in the Caribbean region, and I want to speak to that specifically, is that while we may have funds and grant facilities set up for entrepreneurs, we don't really follow through beyond providing some kind of basic seed funding, if that in fact is available. Not understanding the bootstrap nature of a true startup. So it's always, put 50% and we'll put 50 or something like that. Whereas it's very different in other parts of the world, how this is treated with. And in the absence of that support, you tend to find the digital startups, which really form the basis of this digital economy, not really surviving. So you may find a situation where an idea would be created, there would be some fund available where they could source, some kind of seed funding, but there's no structure in place beyond that. So You fail, as 90% of those startups would in fact fail. But beyond that, there's little or no mentorship, little or no structures like incubating beyond standard startup incubators. So you're talking about second stage incubators or accelerators. You don't see a lot of that happening in the region. And these companies and startups fall by the wayside. We also have real problems, Michelle, with our education system, very real issues. Without waxing lyrical about that, long story short, we can't seem to produce the relevant digital skills that are required to make ourselves relevant in a digital economy. So teaching people how to use a computer or just how to code, yes, that's fine. We can do that. But those are not the only skills that are required to really compete in a digital economy. And we also are sort of pigeonholing people in the computer science or IT fields as those who can contribute. We need to broaden that thinking and broaden that perspective. And even when we have skills that are developed and come out being relevant, because we are unable to employ them or to find a way to have them productively used, you tend to find a significant resource flight. And that is a real issue. So we have many very talented people who can participate in the economy who are quite literally in a diaspora trying to help us now, but they're left 5-10 years ago. We also missing things like venture capital, angel investment. We're missing logistical structures to support things like digital commerce. And we're missing significant legislation, I think, in my view, that will allow this industry to thrive in a way, or maybe I should say, we're probably overregulated in another, maybe to say it another way. So in order for this economy to thrive in the Caribbean, we need a quantum shift in thinking, in a mindset, and it needs to be put at the forefront of the policy agenda and the business agenda. And right now, the digital economy is sort of a nice to have, or it might happen soon, or we will aspire towards it, but no one sees it. Let me not say no one. Many people do not see it as being a very real option for us in the region. And I think that needs to change very, very quickly.
Okay, and how you think we should go about it then to effect that change? Give me about 2 or 3 things you think we should be doing.
Well, at a policy level, from a government policy level, we immediately should divert resources towards the development of digital skills. I am just going to state that very obviously. And I don't mean only those who are in computer science or IT or those kinds of fields, but also in the range of fields within the economy. So you're talking about anything from statisticians to economists to people who are doing English, anything. Build digital skills in those areas so that we can find a way to repurpose those skills and have those skills offered for sale and for economic value outside of the country, because there's a high demand for things like their outsourced accounting skills that we are not taking advantage of, things like that in the gig economy. We also need to look at not those who are in the system alone, but how about those who are unemployed or underemployed? Let's take a look at what's happening with those individuals and perhaps redirect them into this digital skill development and have them focus on the digital economy and get a way to generate revenue in that regard. And then, this is a pet peeve for me, the private sector in the Caribbean territories are very, very heavily focused on what I will call trading or buy and sell models. We really need to find a way to relook that thinking, so all of the conglomerates, all of the large business entities, we don't want to call names here, but you know them. The majority of their approach is through trading. Yes, we do have some manufacturing. Yes, we do have some value added, but we need to have significantly more of those businesses shift their approach from simply trading into adding value locally by doing things in the digital economy. And without getting into that's a whole different discussion. So
Yes.
the businesses need to take focused look at it and put this on their of the objective list to take it forward, as well as the governments, to ensure that these things are given absolute priority to accelerate this transition.
Definitely. Okay. And as you would be aware, digital transformation has been, I guess, one of these buzz terms in the region as well. And every time you hear policymakers talk about digital transformation and how, I guess, this seems to be where the focus is at. But how might you explain the difference between digital transformation and digital economy? Are they complementary, mutually exclusive? What are your thoughts?
So, Michelle, this whole thing with digital transformation, it's really you call it you're right, it is a buzzword, and there are many schools of thought on this, and I have my own personal school of thought, so I'll use my own as opposed to any textbook definition. So, in my view, the digital economy is effectively the superset of all of these things. So you have people call things digitization, there's digitalization, and there's digital transformation, right? In the digital economy, you have an amalgamation of digitalization, and that drives digital transformation, right? So that's my take on the difference. So the digital economy driving digital transformation. But digital transformation is not about technology or about being, doing things digitally. That's what some call digitalization. In my opinion, digital transformation is really a sea change in approach and thinking. So it's the word transformation is important there, and it's both at an individual and at an organizational level. So your approach, both as an individual within a business or within a government or within your own family life, and at an organizational level, needs to shift from what people call analog thinking to digital thinking, meaning that you have to see things that very differently. We're doing it already. We're using our tools, our phones, our tablets, our computers to do many things that we were doing before on these devices, and we don't even realize it. So I'll give you a quick example. If I'm serving a customer as a business, digital transformation means that I'm thinking of what the customer might be needing to be served better with with a higher level of excellence, quickly, and what I would call the minimal friction. And I think that's one of the things that we have to focus on transformation. So, in my view, digital transformation is the removal of friction from the process of doing things that you would ordinarily do. So whether it be customer service, whether it be standing in line at the bank to get something done, whether it be taking a taxi, so that's where you have things like Uber and similar services, booking a hotel. It's just the removal of those processes that cause you to have delays and challenges and friction to get you from point A to point B quickly, efficiently, and with minimal stress. And I know I'm sounding a bit like I'm theoretical about it, but that's how I see it. It's not about the technology. Technology almost recedes in the background, and
Exactly.
we know that it's enabling it, but it's the process of removing this friction from getting from point A to point B. And I don't know if I've summarized it as best as I could, but that's how I see it. It's really this world where we're getting things a lot easier, and we're happier, and we're feeling better about ourselves, if you see what I'm getting at.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it as you rightfully said. I mean, if the technology is in the fore, then something isn't right.
Correct.
What really is, streamlining processes? We as users should almost not realize how much technology is driving the outputs and the processes that we are experiencing. And I'm so thrilled that you actually had a clear understanding that you could share about the difference between digital economy and digital transformation, because I think we're just getting all caught up in a lot of these terms
Exactly. Yeah.
and whatever rhetoric I think that is also attached to them, and maybe missing the core issue and the bigger picture, whatever
Yes.
that might mean.
And if we focus on the technology, we will get lost in it, and and people think it's hard. And I think that's one of the challenges. It's not a hard thing to remove friction. Yes,
Exactly.
yes, you can use the technology to help, and I guess we must. But focusing on the technology is going to cause you to not do things or not do things quickly, or it's going to present you with challenges. And I think that's the one of the main issues that we face in this part of the world, that we are technology. To do this, we have to use the technology, we have to buy technology, and therefore we shall not do it because it's too expensive, it's too hard, takes too long, and suddenly we are left behind.
All right, Tracy, we're beginning to wind down. I mean, can you imagine? I think we've been at it for about half an hour already. But
Yes.
so I just want us to touch on internet governance. As I said in my introduction, you are I guess the past chair of the Internet Society of Trinidad and Tobago, and I know that you wear other hats
Yeah.
in the global internet governance space. So, I think having you here, still almost held hostage. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions just to see where we're at in the internet governance space, and what, in the first instance, if you can share with us, are there any issues, internet governance issues, that you think we should be paying greater attention to here in the Caribbean?
Yeah, so internet governance, it could be seen as an esoteric topic for many people, right? So it's about how the internet is governed, quite literally as it sounds. It's about the domain name system, it's about names and numbers and so on and so forth. And when you tell people in the region about this, some people's eyes glaze over. But if you step back from that, that overarching internet governance technical part of it, you also realize that it's also about how the internet is in fact governed. And what I mean by that, it's how do you use the internet to better your life? How do you use it safely? How do you use it securely? And is there an opportunity for us in the region to contribute to that use, that secure and safe use of the internet? So over and beyond getting into the technical nitty-gritty of things, I think one of the issues that we need to address very quickly in the region, we have a series of what we call country code top-level domain operators. These people who are operating the dot. In my country, it's .tt, in Jamaica, it's .jm, and Barbados is .bb, and so on. So you're familiar with those operators. There's a real opportunity now for our Caribbean people to be utilizing country code top-level domains to really identify our businesses and ourselves with our brands and so on. And I want to bring this to the table because I think that's something that is not only not well addressed, but it's also being taken advantage of by other countries, and we are simply not seeing the benefit of it. So when you go to Canada, as an example, or you go to the UK, how many .coms do you see when you look at a domain, a brand domain name? Very little. You see mostly .ca in Canada. In the UK, you see .co.uk. You go to Germany, you see .de. You go to Japan, you see .co.jp. In those countries, they see their country code top-level domains as being extremely valuable and also linked very much to what they are trying to do as organizations or as businesses or as governments, as the case may be. In this part of the world, for some reason, we don't see it that way. We're almost, thumbing our nose at those things, and we want to always be a .com. So you'll tend to see, let's say, a company in country X. My company name is, Sell Shoes, and then they just put the country name after it. So sellshoescountryname.com. And that looks crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Why don't you put sellshoes.countrycode or .co country code so identify yourself properly? In doing that, we actually will start to generate revenue within the system for our country code top-level domain operators, and they can employ people, and they can build an industry around it. With the whole domain name system, we're seeing it's just over 1,000 new top-level domain names that have come up in the last maybe 5 years, and many people are registering things like .tech and .food and all these other things, and we are still struggling with fighting for .com domain names.
Right.
And the other thing I think we should look at, very importantly, is the idea of securing our internet systems, the DNS, to avoid having phishing attacks, which is really something that we can do very easily through implementing something called DNSSEC, which is a security extension that you can add to your environment at the ISP level or the country code top level, operator level. And in doing that, we're able to better secure our internet operations and perhaps even reduce the level of phishing and similar type harms that are happening within the region.
Right. Okay. Those are excellent points. And certainly even the whole issue of CCTLDs probably is a conversation and a separate conversation we need to have, because as you rightfully said, just the fact now that there are so many domains from which people can choose, and for those country code top level domains, they cost something to maintain, and if somehow we are not using them, it's almost as if we're giving up a resource, and we're not supporting a resource that is ours.
And you'll be surprised to know that in many of these top level country code top level domain, the major buyer of these top level country code top level domains are Chinese companies. So
yes.
Go figure, right?
Yeah, but I think and I guess I just don't want to get into it too much right now in terms of just policies around, national policies around CCTLDs, because
exactly.
I think that clearly is where we probably need to start. All right, and my final question, Tracy. I know that we have the upcoming UN IGF Internet Governance Forum in November in Brazil.
Berlin.
Sorry, in Berlin.
Yeah.
Coming up in November in Berlin. I have Berlin actually. And I know that from our last conversation that there is a dynamic coalition on SIDS. So I wanted to get a sense as to perhaps what SIDS-related issues you think might be discussed at the workshops and other activities that might be planned during the Internet Governance Forum.
Thank you for that question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I am involved in the Dynamic Coalition. I'm the co-coordinator, if that's the word to use, along with a colleague of mine, Maureen Hilliard, who's from Cook Islands in the Pacific.
Right.
So we are building the agenda, actually building an action plan for that Dynamic Coalition. And in addition to that meeting, which will be covering issues such as access, affordability, disaster resilience, even renewable energy type thinking. We believe that the SIDS issues are permeating across the board at the IGF in larger topics, and we are seeing data protection and privacy in particular and related issues affecting the SIDS and being dealt with at the IGF, especially given the whole GDPR and related regulatory issue topics coming up. So I think one of the major issues at the IGF and for SIDS would be that whole concept of where are we going next with the internet. There is a perception that the internet is in some ways going to be fragmented or carved up in between, let's say, different sides of the world. I don't want to get into who on these sides. And in doing that, you're finding a lot of attempts to regulate, which is the soft version of it, or in the hard version, to censor what's happening on the internet. So regulation attempts to, remove some level of free speech, monitor what's happening. And in a worst case scenario, we just saw countries like South Sudan and sorry, is it South Sudan or just Sudan? I think just Sudan. I can't remember if it's Sudan or South Sudan. And a few African countries shut the internet down during
Yes.
either elections or during periods of violence to reduce what they perceive to be opposition to government or opposition to the current leadership. And at the IGF, which is not necessarily a political or activist forum, we tend to find a lot of sessions coming up to discuss that, as well as issues such as fake news and the impact of regulation on the internet and what that means for you as a user. Because as the internet grows and gets more and more entrenched, as more than 4 billion users start to use the internet, people who would like to control it are starting to find a way to exert their control. And in doing that, they're looking to block or, in a worst case scenario, create their own version of the internet that is not open to the rest of the world. And that is a very dangerous precedent that we see being set. And if that is not really well addressed, then back to the small and developing states issue, we are some of the smallest actors in the internet world, and we can be easily cut off very quickly from the internet by actions such as this, depending on how resilient the network is. And especially some of our own countries within the region decide to do something like this. And there's nothing to say that that could happen tomorrow, that a Pacific territory or Caribbean territory could join the bandwagon and say, let's block the internet in country X or country Y. And all of a sudden, we're part of this whole fragmentation issue that's emerging. And that brings very real issues, economic and access issues to small and developing states, because the internet is not simply about spreading, fake news or whatever they think it is. It's, in many cases, it's a business tool. It's an information tool in terms of people getting to learn about, so it's educational. It solves, people are connected to the internet for their health and for other issues. So if these things start to break and have, negative connotations based on regulatory interventions, then we could really see vulnerable economies like SIDS, who might rely on the internet even for disaster prevention, fall by the wayside because of short-sightedness by some of these regulators or governments who may be doing things that are not necessarily in line with what we would like them to do.
Absolutely, because here it is that the internet has become something that is so integral to our lives. So it's not necessarily just about, as you rightfully say, business, but you manage your health. You're looking at whether or not you have electricity, water supply. Countries are doing these things with the benefits of the internet and ICT and monitoring these things. So so the power play, sometimes we have to be mindful about the degree to which we manipulate, as well as we use those things in the manner in which we use those things, because it can have a real and serious impact on people's everyday lives, and it's not necessarily just about wielding power.
That's right. It's a slippery slope once you start interfering with, and the thing is, because the lack of understanding of what the internet really is not there in many governments or many regulatory agencies. When you start to tweak and interfere at one part of it, you don't realize what you're doing for the bigger picture, and all of a sudden there's an unintended impact and in difficulty in returning from that course that you've gone down. And so the IGF is going to look at those issues. But at the end of the day, Michelle, it's something that there are only a few people in the region, the Caribbean region in particular, who are involved in internet governance. Similarly, less in the Pacific, far less, because they're a smaller entity. We need to get more of our citizens, more of our thinkers, more of our bright minds involved in this discussion, in this process. I'm happy that you're doing these types of podcasts to spread the word, and we need to ensure that it's not just those who are passionate about it, but it's everybody who has an interest in the internet and internet policy and what it means for them, that they get involved so they can have a say and they can have a voice, and they could also, in many cases, be able to influence what's happening. Because if you don't do that, then those who have the necessary power or strength will be able to influence. We don't want a situation to happen in our part of the world where some country decides that they're going to block the internet, and that is what causes us to become interested. It
Exactly.
should not be left to that level of last resort type thinking. We should really be very proactive in this, and the more we understand and know, the better it is for all of us. So we can take in front, as we say in this part in the Caribbean, and do more for the internet. Strength of the internet is strength of what it means for us.
Absolutely. And on that note, Tracy, thank you so much. I
Thank you,
could talk
Michelle.
I could talk to you all day and just go down the rabbit hole with so many of these issues, but I
Yes,
think we may need to leave something for another day, and probably I can't wait, or we can't wait for another year to pass by to catch up. So
definitely.
so let's probably keep our links open so that we can connect again, perhaps either a little later on in the year or early next year, and
Yeah,
just begin to.
perhaps after the IGF, we could probably arrange something to do a debrief. Maybe that might be a good way to do it.
Excellent, and I do
Yeah,
agree. So
yeah.
thank you so much and take care.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.